was on a sailboat.
COVID-19 webinar. This one is wage support programs for hiring students. And I want to thank everyone online for joining us this morning. I'm Kent Roberts, Vice President of Policy at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'm excited to host this webinar, particularly this one, which is about wage subsidies supporting businesses and encourage them to hire students. Our speakers today are a group of experts who are here to give you their insights on the wage programs, the wage support programs, and to answer as many of your questions as we can accommodate in the hour. So from the Information and Communications Technology Council, we have Tim Perrin, the Atlantic Regional Coordinator. In fact, a little anecdote, I mean, this webinar really came about from a conversation that Tim and I had some time ago about all these type of programs that were available, and just really came from a chat about how do we make this more available? How do we share this with the Chamber's members so that everyone's aware of the value and supports that are available to hire our young people. We also have Teresa Myra, who works for Science, Information, Technology, Engineering, Cooperative Education Program at Dalhousie University. That's quite a mouthful, Teresa. I want to see that on a business card. So welcome, Teresa. And with Teresa, we have Cindy Ryan, who's the Employer Development Coordinator at DAL as well. So welcome, Cindy. And last but not least, Margaret Swartz, the Outreach Coordinator at the Youth Employment Programs at Labour and Advanced Education with provincial government. So welcome, Margaret. So again, thank you all for joining us on our webinar today, and thank you, our panel of experts, for sharing your expertise with us. Again, we'll have a chance to answer questions after the presentation, so please type your questions into the Q&A box. And if you are commenting in the chat box, I would encourage you all to address the message to all panelists and all attendees so everyone can see the post, as it may be of interest to all. So on that note, I'll turn it over to our guests, and our first speaker will be Tim. Thanks, Tim.
Great, thank you, Kent. Thanks for the warm introduction, appreciate it. So I will just share my screen with everybody, make sure that that is working well. Let's see. There, how are we doing? Everybody see my screen? Perfect. All right. Well, listen, thank you everybody for joining us today. We've got an action-packed lineup coming to you with some interesting, hopefully some useful and valuable information for you on how you can bring some students into the workplace and have them add value with supports from both the federal government through ICTC's program and from the province with some great partnership opportunities. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So today we're going to be, you'll hear us talking about work-integrated learning. So I thought I would just throw up a definition of what that means before I get into things. I do want to start off with a success story about a startup company that was able to leverage some students getting both provincial and some federal supports. But work-integrated learning is about giving students an opportunity to get some experience in the workplace, make them more hireable. So obviously there's a benefit there for students, but I think equally that there is a big benefit for employers as well, because what better way to decide who your future employees will be if you're able to bring them into the workplace and see how they work for you for a period of 2, 3, or 4 months. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity and it's a win-win for everybody. And that's why the federal government and the provincial governments are very supportive of providing some incentives to help employers make this a reality. So during today's event, what you're going to hear about, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about a WIL success story. I think it's a very interesting one, and I'll go into that in a moment. Then we'll talk about ICTC's WIL-Digital wage subsidy, and that's the federal support program that will help offset the cost to bring a student into the workplace for a work term. Then Margaret's going to talk about the provincial wage subsidies. And then we have Teresa and Cindy, who will be able to talk about the great talent pool that we have here in Nova Scotia, and then also a little bit about how to engage with Dalhousie University in particular, because it can be a little daunting because they are a large organization. So just briefly about ICTC, we're a not-for-profit based in Ottawa. We've been around for quite a while, originally as a sector council. Mid-2000s, we became a not-for-profit. We do a lot of good research, and you can see some of the areas that we do research in over here. But we also have what we call our capacity building and innovation side of the business. And that's where I work, and that's where a lot of these great support programs come out of that can help us grow the digital economy in Canada. That's ultimately our goal. So let's talk a little bit about a success story. This is a fairly recent success story. Back in 2018, Open Ocean Robotics, which is, they're an outfit out on the West Coast. They were a startup in the CEO Julie Angus's garage, and they were looking for some student talent to help them get over a particular hurdle. And so they engaged with the local university. There was some provincial subsidies, and as it turns out, they also took some ICTC subsidies to help make it very cost effective for an early stage startup to engage with some very great talent. And the talent was very successful. As you can see up on the board here, you can see some of the awards that they've been winning, which is fantastic. But I think what's also very interesting is that there's a couple of people. This is just one page of their team on their website. But this gentleman down here, who's now on board as a full-time employee, he was actually one of those students that helped them with their early stage design initiatives. And then there's another gentleman here who you'll see who's actually in his 4th year as an electrical engineering student, and very likely will be brought on as a full-time employee once he does graduate. So the reason I wanted to mention this success story is because I know it's easy to think of students being a bit more of a burden than a benefit, but certainly if you pick the right students and you get the right supports, I think they can be a great benefit to your organization. So one of the ways that we support employers bringing on students into the workplace is with our Work Integrated Learning Digital, or WIL-Digital subsidy. And you can see what the definition is up on the board there, but this is a program that is funded by the federal government through the Student Work Placement Program. And the Student Work Placement Program is one of those subsidies that can help you go from the financial cost of bringing a student into the workplace with no subsidy. It can be fairly substantial. Students are often paid between $15 and $20 an hour, although we don't have a minimum except for minimum wage, but typically people will pay a little more than minimum. But with our subsidy in place alone, then you can see this actually brings the cost down quite a lot. And then, as Margaret's going to talk a little later on, if you can add in the provincial wage subsidy to that can make that student talent very, very cost effective, sometimes at zero cost. And Margaret will talk about that in a moment. Now, I should mention that there are quite a number of other, we call ourselves the SWPP partners, and SWPP is the Student Work Placement Program. And so these folks work in very different areas. So you can see on the board here, the folks, for instance, there's an aerospace organization, there's environmental, there's BioTalent Canada working in the biotechnology area. But the funding stream that we have is available for to support employers taking students into roles within the digital economy. And that's pretty broad. And so there's very few roles that a post-secondary student would be going into that we likely wouldn't be able to work together with a business partner and provide some funding stream for that. But I do want to mention that there are a number of other organizations out there. Some of them are quite well known, and they all do an awesome job. And just as Teresa mentioned, or will mention, is that universities in the region all collaborate together because a rising tide raises all ships, and the SWPP partners work together as well because we really want to promote the uptake of students in the workplace. So thinking about how you qualify for our subsidy, as I mentioned, we need to be offering, the role needs to be offering a position that is relevant to the digital economy. So it's not so much about the student anymore. They can come from any discipline. It's not so much about what your line of business is, although we would like to see obviously some of these emerging technologies, but really it's any business, any student discipline, and we specifically would include roles, and I highlighted them here because I think it's important, because business development is something which is a lot of people are looking for. Digital marketing today particularly is an area that a lot of businesses are looking for help with, and also the technical sales area. So what you'll see in a moment is some of the more traditional IT areas, like game designer and programmer and some of these other things. And that's when you think about IT roles in the past, that's what you would think about. And what I'm hoping that you'll get out of today's presentation is don't think about digital economy roles as being IT roles, because they are quite different. And I'm going to show you that in just a moment. So along with the traditional IT roles, which are highly fundable by ourselves, there's also some traditional co-op engineering roles. And what I did and where these came from is that, and you'll see it a little later on in my presentation, I actually went into our application portal and I looked at all of the applications that are going in there this year. And I pulled out some of the job descriptions that people are applying for funding for. And these are ones I didn't edit them in any way. So these are live positions that are going into our system, and we are providing funding to companies that are taking on students in these areas. But this next slide, which is these are what I call these other digital tech roles or other non-traditional digital economy roles outside of the normal IT and engineering mindset. So if you look at a few of these ones, and I like this one in particular, I'll talk maybe very briefly about this one, content scriptwriter, but there is a Nova Scotia company that's actually creating gaming based on folklore, and they needed someone to be able to prepare content, to read dialogue. You know, this is very non-traditional, but definitely very digital. So this, I'm hoping that by looking at some of these non-traditional tech roles up there, that you'll start getting an idea of the kind of things that maybe ICTC will be able to help you with some funding on. And as I said, there's very few roles, provided that they have that digital component to them, which is fairly easy to get, that we can't fund. And you can see some other ones here, research assistant, that's pretty broad. I think also I mentioned design and marketing associate, so that would be on the sales and business development side. And then looking at the, let's see, where's another good one here? Oh, here's a good one, housing data researcher. So this is someone that was actually looking at housing data and using some technical tools to come up with some interesting insights into the local housing market. So all highly fundable by ICTC. So also, as part of the application process, and I'll show you that in a little while, you do need to surface some digital tech skills that the student will be working on. So I showed you earlier, these are the positions that they were working in. So here are some of the digital tech skills that people are working in. And again, as I mentioned, digital marketing and blog and social media management is certainly one of the skills out there. Research skills is another good area. And here's an interesting one, assisting with payroll tax calculations. You know, if you ever have in-house payroll, there's a lot of technology that goes along with that. And crafting an adventure in our administrative portal is that gaming company that I was referencing earlier. So a very interesting application of our funding stream, but again, highly relevant to the digital economy today. So if you're wondering what kind of subsidies are out there to help with you bringing in students into your business to add some value, well, ICTC's WIL-Digital program, and what you'll see there is that I've crossed out the way it was pre-COVID-19. And as Kent mentioned, these are some of the responses that we've been able to put together to help businesses respond to this current crazy situation we find ourselves in. But our subsidy has now been increased by the federal government to cover 75% of the salary, up to $7,500 for all students. So as you see earlier, we were trying to promote diversity in the workplace, so we will provide more to promote diversity. But the federal government has recognized that businesses need some help and students of all sorts need help this year. And so we've increased that subsidy quite substantially. Now also, as I mentioned, many of the provinces have some provincial subsidies, and Nova Scotia is no different. And Margaret is going to talk about the great provincial subsidies that we can combine together to come up with some very attractive options to bring on students into the workplace. So in terms of employer eligibility, what do you need, you as a business owner, when you think about your business? I've put up the requirements here, but effectively, we are able to fund all the time for-profit and not-for-profit organizations, and we have a lot of applications in the not-for-profit sector this year as well. And you do need to be a business or a not-for-profit registered in Canada. And then for this year, for fiscal 2021, then we're also able to directly provide funding stream to post-secondaries. And I know that Dalhousie and other universities and colleges in Nova Scotia are taking advantage of that to bring some student talent into the organization to help them with their digital content creation and so forth. And I think one of the other real keys, and you can read the other ones there, but the student needs to be hired as an employee, not as a contractor. And that way, all of the workman's comp rules apply and all those other good things that employees benefit from when they're an employee, not a contractor. So it's not so much about the business, but it's about the position. So a great example I like to use is that outside of Bridgewater, there's a local plumbing and heating company, and they came to me and they said, hey, Tim, we're digitizing our back office. So they were putting in some software products in their back office. We're very familiar with hiring on trades for summer positions. Would we be able to qualify for a position to be funded through ICTC to work in our back office? And I said, well, just write up a position description for me. Let me take a look. And absolutely, it was very, very digital economy relevant. So it's not about the line of work that the company is in, the line of business, it's about the position. And as I said earlier, it's just about relevance to the digital economy, and that includes all the business development and the technical sales and digital marketing roles. Now, the other interesting thing is that it can be full-time or part-time. And so I know a number of organizations are bringing somebody in on a full-time work term over the summer, perhaps, and then particularly if that was a digital marketing role, and then if the student is willing and the company has a need, then keep them on as a part-time role for the winter or for the fall, and that helps them continue with the social media promotion and all those things. And ICTC is able to fund both full-time and part-time positions, and you'll see in a moment we also have great flexibility in terms of the kind of students that we can work with as well. The only real requirement that we have is that the role needs to offer a meaningful learning opportunity for the student. Right, and so that could be in our funding requirements. That could be a summer job for a student who it doesn't have to be an academic requirement, but in the cohort role, then it would absolutely need to reinforce some of those academic requirements as well. But we can work with either type of role. And then for fiscal 2021, we're able to offer both office or remote, and I think many of the placements that we're seeing now, of course, are remote. And there used to be a requirement for a company to, if the company would normally take on 1 or 2 students a year, then in order to get our funding, then they would need to take on additional students, because the goal was to create more opportunities. But that net new requirement, as it was called, that has been waived for this fiscal year, which really means that whether or not you've taken on students in the past, you do qualify for our ICTC funding. So that is a great new flexibility as well. So then in terms of the student, as you can see, they do need to be registered in a publicly funded Canadian post-secondary institution. And so that means that if it were a private college, then unfortunately we would not be able to work with them. But for all the publicly funded colleges and universities in Canada, and obviously in Nova Scotia as well, all highly fundable, we do ask for the student to provide us with a proof of registration. And they do need to be a student. So I've been asked a couple of times, well, what about a high school student who just graduated that's going to university in the fall? Sadly, our program wouldn't cover them because they would be in that in-between time where they're not currently a student in post-secondary, but they have graduated. Even though they're registered, they're not a student. But interestingly, we can also work with full or part-time students, so great flexibility there. And we can work with students from NSCC, from all the universities, at all the levels. So if you were a business that had a very specific need for some very talented individuals, then you might turn to maybe 4th year undergrads or master's or PhD students, and they can all be funded by our program. So a very flexible program. Now, they do, Margaret will talk a little bit more about international students, but for our program, we do ask that they be Canadian citizens or permanent residents, and they could be protected by the Refugee Protection Act as well. And we would ask for them to upload supporting documents for that. Oh, and I should mention that there's no age limit to that. So, you know, if you have a mature returning student to university or someone who's doing some sort of career transition, I had a case in the Valley where a teacher was retraining as a web developer and had 15 years as an educator. So what a great student talent that would be coming out of NSCC with all that educational background going into web development. So, you know, that's having no age limit can be very beneficial for us as well. So hopefully that's inspired you to say, fantastic, I want to go and get some ICTC funding. How do I do that? So what I would ask you to do is visit our web portal type in WIL.Digital in your browser window, and that will take you to our portal. That'll take you here. And this is how we have a little bit more information here. There's some other documents you can download that would give you more detail about the program. And then if you wanted to apply for the ICTC funding, it's a quick and easy process. Click on the Apply Now button, and then you can either sign up for a new account, or if you already have created your business profile, then you can just log into your account. First thing you'll be asked to do is create a business profile. You do that once. And then for each of the positions that you want to have a subsidy for, you will put some position information in, and I've shown you the screen here. And then we ask you to surface what are those 3 skills that the student is going to be working in. And if you think back to some of those non-traditional skills along with the traditional skills, that's where the content on my slide came from, was what people had filled out in those fields. And then, as I mentioned, if you say this is fantastic, I want to take 2 or 3 students on board, then you create your business application once, and then that you'd have your first application gets created, and that's what this number is down here. And then you would just simply click on create a new submission, and you can create as many submissions as you want with the same kind of information. And then you will provide, when you find a student, you put their information in, and then we will reach out to the student. They will upload their information. When that's all done, we come back to the employer, who then signs a contract, which basically you agree to do what you said you would do in the original process. And then we need you to sit together with the student, create a learning plan. It's just a short process. And we will come back to both the employer and the student in the middle of the work term, just to make sure that the employer is comfortable and happy with what they're getting in terms of student talent, and the student feels that they're getting a meaningful work integrated learning experience as agreed to in the learning plan. And then a couple of weeks before the end of the work term, we would also ask for that final evaluation on both sides, again, so that we can collect and get the assessments and make sure that the program is being effective and make any changes as necessary. So as I said, working with students is very valuable. It can add a lot of value to your organization. Doing that when you're paying them $15 to $20 an hour, that can be a bit of a financial burden, particularly in these days. But with our WIL-Digital subsidy, that helps bring the cost down substantially, as I mentioned, up to $7,500 for each work term. And then, as Margaret is going to talk about momentarily, with the Nova Scotia provincial supports that are out there, that can make it an even more cost-effective experience. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. And as Ken said earlier, very happy to answer any questions at the end of our event. And I will now turn over to Margaret and leave it in your capable hands, Margaret.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Tim. Can everyone hear me? Is my volume all right? Okay, great. So I'm just going to share my screen. And it's going to pop up here in 1 second. Hold on. So, hi. Yeah, my name is Margaret. I work with Department of Labor and Advanced Education with provincial government. And I also want to acknowledge there's a lot of familiar names in attendance today. And I see there's a number of employer engagement specialists who work at the different Nova Scotia work centers across the province. So I'm really happy to see you guys here. Um, for those who might not know, they're on the grounds working with employers and job seekers every day, trying to make those connections. So it's extra valuable for you guys to have some insight into how the funding can be applied in these situations. So I'm going to talk first about the co-op program because it does have some priority here in regards to this conversation around stacking and taking on students for a period of time. So the co-op education incentive, it's been around for a long time. It's quite popular in Nova Scotia. And essentially what an employer gets is a co-op student who would be taking a mandatory co-op program at a post-secondary institution. Those typically land between 12 and 16 weeks or 3 or 4 months, lining up with a semester. And how this has worked is as long as an employer pays that co-op student $15 an hour, we've reimbursed them $7.50. And new this past year is the addition of another $1.50, bringing it to $9 if that student is a member of an underrepresented group. Some things have changed because of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and we realize that hiring has become very difficult for employers. So we're working very closely with our partners, with our SWPP partners, and ICTC being one of them. And so we've made it possible for employers to combine both of our funding options to hire a student and not have to pay very much out of pocket. So here's what that could look like. Originally, we haven't allowed stacking, and typically we don't, but under these circumstances, that's something that we're allowing, and that's kind of kicked off this summer is the first time we're seeing that. This fall term, we're having that the case as well, and this upcoming winter co-op term, stacking our funding options will also be encouraged and promoted. So if an employer goes and they apply for the ICTC funding or another SWPP partners funding, and they come to the province and apply for the co-op education incentive, and they're approved for both of those, then they can actually get up to 90% or 100% of the wages covered. It would be 100% if the student is a member of an underrepresented group. And as Tim mentioned, they're unable to support international students, but with the provincial co-op funding program, we are able to support them. So if you have an employer who wants to apply and hire a co-op, an international co-op student, we can cover that at 100% for the fall and the winter terms. So one thing I really want to promote, and we'll be sharing this on social media, and we'll hope that you guys will reshare as well, is that the co-op portal for the winter term opens up next month, August 15th. Folks can start to apply for co-op funding to bring on a student for the winter term, and really think about taking advantage, because you can stack to get some really great funds for this. As you know, our co-op portals did close for both the summer and the fall, and we're reevaluating that every day because the landscape is changing every day, and employers are struggling. And so some employers who have agreed to take on fall co-op students may have to cancel those agreements. And if that happens, then we're able to open up that funding opportunity for other employers who are able to offer some work to students during the fall. So I'm gonna go to my next slide. So that's the co-op program, and we really encourage you guys to ask some questions, and we'll get to those near the end. The other funding program I did want to mention is the Graduate to Opportunity program, which makes it easier to hire graduates for full-time work in their field. And what you can get is 25% of their first year salary, covered by the province, 35% if they're a member of an underrepresented group, and then 12.5% of their second year salary. So some of you on the call might be familiar with this program. It's been around for 5 years, and it is for any small business in Nova Scotia that's under 100 full-time staff, as well as any startup, any nonprofit or charity, or any social enterprise can take advantage of this. The graduate that you hire just has to have completed post-secondary education in the last 12 months. And that could be from an institution outside of Nova Scotia. If they graduated in Alberta or Scotland, but they want to live and work here, then, and your business is based here, then they can be hired with the support of this program. They can also be an international graduate who's not a permanent resident. They could be on a 3-year working visa and be supported with this funding program. You just have to be offering a new full-time permanent role that offers a minimum of $30,000 annually. It's been around for 5 years. We've supported over 12,000 graduates with getting work in Nova Scotia. The other program I quickly wanted to mention is Innovate to Opportunity. And this is specific for hiring master's and PhD level graduates for jobs focused on innovation and supporting a business, small to medium-sized business, with their export potential. So this program is a little bit more niche. We don't have the same uptake that we do with GTO, but we want employers to know that this is an option as well. So this is also a graduate hiring program, and for both of these graduate hiring programs, we've created some flexibilities. So if an employer currently has a GTO or an ITO hire, but they've had to slow down their business as a result of the pandemic, they can put that position on hold and then restart it in 3 to 6 months if they need to. And they can also stack this with some of the federal emergency funds that have been offered by federal government, including that 75% subsidy for qualifying businesses. And we can also offer funding payments a little earlier. Usually we do that at the 6-month, 15-month mark for GTO, but we could do that close to the start if they're having challenges. So I think there's some questions in the chat. I'm wondering if we should hold those until the end. And then in the meantime here, I'm going to pass it over to Teresa.
Great, thank you, Margaret. I'll get my screen up here. All right, everyone can see that okay? All right, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm so pleased to be here with my colleague Cindy from the business school. We wanted to quickly start and give you a Dal overview of Dalhousie. So just to give you an idea, we have over 19,000 students at Dalhousie. 60% are from outside of Nova Scotia and 22% are international. And one other piece I want to mention is that we've had over 2,000 students take part in co-op program terms each year. So within DAL, we have 4 different departments that do work around work integrated learning, co-op, internship, and graduate recruitment. So we have our architecture and planning career services. I won't read through all of those. Then you have our program of science, information technology, and engineering, commonly called site co-op. So we have computer science, engineering, science, computer science graduate programs. My colleague Cindy will be talking more about the management career services and their programs. And then we have our BISSET Student Success Center, where you can post jobs, full-time, part-time, contract, volunteer, all for free through our portal, which I'll also mention a little bit later here. So basically within Dalhousie, we provide co-op programs. So basically it means the students alternate their study terms with paid work term experiences. So those work terms were usually 4 months, sometimes 8, 12, 16, depending on the program. So they'll go out and work with your company for 4 months full-time, usually 35 to 40 hours, 14 to 16 weeks, but there's lots of flexibility in there as well. So we have the students available Right now, we're posting opportunities for the fall, which is September to December in all of our programs. And this is pretty wide, Atlantic-wide for co-op programs. This is not just Dal. Then in September, we will start actively moving towards the winter, which is January to April. But because of COVID, we'll probably be working between the 2 terms. And then we have our summer term, which is May to August. So right now we have, majority of our students out working this summer. And I'll pass this over to you, Cindy.
Thanks, Teresa. So Management Career Services is what the department's called with Dalhousie in terms of the Faculty of Management and the disciplines that have to do with under the Faculty of Management. So we have mandatory co-op at Dalhousie Business, and what that means is our Bachelor of Commerce co-op has 3 mandatory co-ops that they do, and Teresa explained that they're in the summer, fall, and winter. They're their majors, as well as that we have a Bachelor of Management internship. They do a voluntary placement of 8 or 12 months. That's a very small cohort group. It's about 20 students a year. With the Bachelor of Commerce that I was just talking about, there's 300 students that have to do co-op each and every semester. So it's quite a lucrative amount of students that are looking for co-op each and every semester. We have our Corporate Residency MBA, and that Corporate Residency MBA does an actual mandatory 8-month corporate placement, and they do them all over Canada and as well as within Nova Scotia, and these are their majors. And all of these programs are eligible for labor and advanced education funding, as they are mandatory components of the program. So I would like to stress that as well as we have new graduate recruitment in those areas as well. Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, Cindy. And then, of course, commonly called SITE, Science, IT, and Engineering. We have 24 programs, 3 faculties, approximately 1,500 students per year and growing. As you can see, we have all of our science programs with our new math and stats co-op last summer, our sustainability co-op that just launched for the first time this summer. Within our engineering, the majority do 4, but we have many of our programs that do 8, 12, and 16. So you can see all those disciplines of engineering. And then in our computer science, we have a computer science and applied computer science, as well as 3 master's programs. The Masters of E-commerce, Masters of Informatics, and a Masters of Applied Computer Science. So of the 3, the largest is the Masters of Applied Computer Science. We have about 50 students in that program every 4 months, and they do their internship at the end of their work term, and then they graduate. So for companies, it's great for looking at full-time hiring. The other 2, the e-commerce and health informatics, are usually available in the summer on average. So within talent, I just want to bring to your attention the importance of when you're posting jobs and you're interacting with post-secondary institutions, you're building your talent, you're building your brand. It's a cost-effective way to meet staffing challenges, for staff vacations, peak periods. Also, students bring great knowledge and fresh perspectives, and sometimes asking questions can just can really spark another conversation and project. We talked about building your brand on campus. It's a great way to kind of build those connections with post-secondary. And it's also a great way to fit your long-term recruitment and succession planning. Cindy, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to mention that we have an online portal, as Teresa mentioned, and that portal, at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about ways for different co-op opportunities through architecture planning, site engineering, IT, as well as management career services, which is business. Then we have our business center. All of this is one-stop shop at Dalhousie. Basically, as an employer, you gain access for free to an employer account through our portal called My Career. And having access to that portal, you also get friendly reminders that we send about labor and advanced education when the deadlines are, because they are 4 months in advance. Too often when employers are first coming on board, they may not realize this recruitment cycle. So it's a friendly reminder, as well as, if you can go to the next slide, Teresa, just want to mention, you know, this is the steps to hiring. And so basically you create a job description. Teresa and I are there to also to support you. If you're very, very new at this and you're bringing on an employee for the very first time, this might be something that might be not, you know, you're not familiar with. We have a template to kind of guide you, as well as once you identify what kind of student you're looking for, then that can kind of help, we can help you navigate the funding sources. So, you know, Tim talked about ICTC, and in terms of their, you know, affiliation with their company, as their funding, pardon me, and when it looks like stacking, it can get complicated for employers. What I mean by that is there's two sets of ways to render this funding, and then as an employer, you have to, you know, navigate through that. So sometimes it's important to connect with the business development team with, you know, a university that you'd like to affiliate yourself, or a career specialist, because they could support you with the quick steps on how to navigate that, as well as also, you know, look to what area would be best interest for your student. What we mean by that is, so we're promoting Dalhousie, and we are working for Dalhousie. However, we do have good relationships with all our counterparts of all the universities. And so, for instance, if you are looking for a very specialized student that doesn't work within our faculty, or we don't have, you know, that we would definitely make a suggestion or a referral to one of our counterparts. But in terms of you reaching out to us, I think it's the best if you are thinking about it, or if you have been on the fence and you're not really sure how to navigate, or if you are already a seasoned kind of employer who's used to looking at co-op or bringing on co-op students, and you're looking to leverage more because of the funding, or perhaps you currently have a co-op student and you're looking at how can I get that funding match piece. So there is a lot that it can be maneuvered around. However, I always recommend just a quick email to Teresa or I, and we can always make the referral accordingly. Or for example, if you wanted to go on the portal with Tim and you wanted to apply for funding immediately, Tim can always make a recommendation to a university to kind of hook you up with us, because we are all working, you know, very effectively together to try to make this seamless for employers. And we do realize there is, you know, a bit of a learning curve, but we hope to support you in any way we can, as we realize. And I did notice as well, Margaret, there was a lot of familiar faces in the chat, in the participation. And so, you know, you can take our LinkedIn down, or email us, or give us a call. We are using our cell phones. And so although we are all working from home, we are very much available. And, you know, at this point in time, I think if there's any questions, there's 1 minute left. We could look to that unless anybody else has anything to add.
I just want to just add in there and say thanks for everyone for listening. And if you can connect to Cindy and I, we will make sure that we can connect you within Dal, but also with our counterparts at St. Mary's, Cape Breton,
Yes.
St. FX, Mount St. Vincent, you name it. Depending on what your hiring need is, we're here to help you with that and direct you to the appropriate funding source, and do referrals. Tim and I do a lot of that back and forth with companies just to make your life easier. So thank you so much.
And on our co-op education website, we actually have a list of all the co-op coordinators across the province, the institution that they represent, and the programs that they represent. So that's a really easy document to kind of help identify where you might want to go to find the student that's right for you. And I'm happy to share that link in the chat. I'll drop that in.
That's a great idea. And we're happy to always share our counterparts as well. So thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Well, thank you all very much. And a really big thank you to Tim, Margaret, Teresa, and Cindy for taking us through that presentation. I mean, you know, a couple highlights for me really is the flexibility of these programs is really incredible. The talent availability is really mind-boggling. If you think about it as a business that needs that type of support and how specialized you can look for a student. And the collaboration between these people on the screen is kind of unheard of between government, not-for-profit, and universities. So coming from government, I'm thrilled to see that. But you know, when you think the thing I took away from Tim's presentation, when you talk about the digital economy and how broad it was and the positions that qualify, I think that's a key piece here. And then certainly the second key piece for me is the funding and the stackability of the funding. That you can have some incredible people working for you and not pay for them at all. 100% funding in the right circumstances. And we have two corporate residency MBAs here at the Chamber doing incredible work for us, and I couldn't recommend them more highly. So quickly, with the time that we have remaining, there are a few questions. One is a very quick one, I think directed at you, Tim. It asks about when the funding is received if approved for a placement, and I know the province has said, yes, you get 60% of that up front. I just wonder for the federal program, Tim, when people would see that funding.
Right, yeah, so traditionally, pre-COVID, it would be at the end of the work term. You would just submit the payroll records. We would take a look and see, make sure we calculate the subsidy based on what you actually paid. But because of COVID, we're able to do that at the midway point of the work term. So after 8 weeks of work term, you can submit payroll records, and then we're able to advance 50% of the funding, and then the balance would be at the end of the work term.
Again, that's great flexibility. Another question, and Tim, I think this comes from your presentation, but certainly any of these questions anyone can weigh in on, please do. And this one says, will the waiving of the net new positions requirement be temporary? And again, it comes from a charity saying that we're not focused on increasing income through our business processes, so the number of positions we can afford level off. However, having students work on special projects in a term position typically builds new expectations of our clients, and work is needed to be done on an ongoing basis, which overloads core staff.
There you go. So let me take that one, because I think net new is sort of a requirement of our program. So the goal from the federal government was to open up new work terms beyond what would normally be done without the federal support. So early version of that meant that you each year would need to add additional students, but that wasn't practical. So the way that net new works out, well, let me answer the question. The question was, is that going to be something which will continue? And that is an unknown, but it certainly is only a flexibility for this fiscal year. So through March 31st, 2021, the net new requirement has been waived. And I suspect it will come back, but just understand that it doesn't mean that you have to keep on adding more and more and more students. Basically, what would happen is that the first year that you would apply, we would find out, do you normally hire students without funding? And if you do, then that becomes your baseline. Let's say you normally would do 2 students without funding, then you would have to actually hire 3 students in order to qualify for funding for 1 from us. But you wouldn't have to keep on increasing that number. It could always be, you could hire 1 and get funding if you traditionally had done 2. So I think that's important to understand that. And if that's not clear, then please give me a shout and we can talk more fully about that offline.
Great, thank you. Margaret, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just was thinking, for anybody that's on the webinar today and you're thinking of employers or other contacts that could benefit from this information, we're going to be doing the same thing tomorrow through Volta Labs. So I'm going to drop the events registration link in here, and if you have any contacts that you think would benefit from hearing this same message, please encourage them, if they have the time, to tune in tomorrow, because we'll be talking about this again.
Great, thank you, Margaret. One question that, and I can throw this out to anyone, and hopefully you have an answer, but one question we hear a lot when people are looking for funding is the funding qualified by any other funding that people have received during COVID, either the wage subsidy, does that affect whether they can qualify for this type of funding?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me answer that one first, and then if there's any follow-up answers from Margaret, perhaps. So the ICTC's federal funding, we can combine with any other funding stream except for other federal programs. So if there were a COA funding or federal support program coming out as a result of COVID, we couldn't combine our federal funding with another federal program, but with provincial supports or industry group supports or other, then that certainly is always available from the ICTC perspective.
So Tim, just to follow up there, so if someone is getting SUS, the wage subsidy in their organization, they could not apply for student support through your organization?
Maybe I wasn't clear. We're not looking at what the company is getting in terms of federal supports. It's how is that student position going to be funded? Right. And it cannot be funded by combining 2 federal programs together. So, that other wage subsidy, that would be you could compartmentalize that. That's over here, that's supporting others. This program is coming out of the, whether it's a combination of the province and us, or us and the company.
Fair enough. I mean, technically, yes, because the SUS, for example, supports current employees, and this program is basically net new, as we talked about. So yeah.
Right. Yes.
Great answer. Thank you.
I have something to add there. So a lot of those emergency wage subsidy funds that are available right now that are federal government, they can be combined with our provincial youth hiring programs that I just talked about. So for co-op incentive, graduate to opportunity, innovate to opportunity, all of those are, wage subsidies for hiring a young person into your organization. And if you also needed to access any of those federal emergency wage subsidies, that there's a 10% one, there's a 75% one, that can be combined with our provincial programs, as long as the combined doesn't exceed 100%, and we'll work that out with you. But just, yeah, we've had employers doing that this summer, experiencing that for the first time, being able to stack, and that's just the lay of the land these days. So we need to make it as easy as possible if we can.
Yeah, that's great, Margaret. Thank you very much. A relatively easy question. How many students can I hire with this funding? Will I receive 75% for each student? Yeah,
so from ICTC's perspective, we don't put a limit on how many subsidies you can apply for. I mean, there is a finite amount of money, obviously, but we have still plenty of funding to go around. And then we do have agreements with some of the post-secondaries in Nova Scotia. So we're kind of pre-allocating funding to Dalhousie, for example. We have an MOU in place so that even if we ran out of funding nationally, we would still have funding that was dedicated to Dalhousie and other universities here in the region. So no limit, and as I showed on one of my slides, you put your business profile in once, and then you can put multiple submissions in for funding, and each one would be funded at the same level.
I would like to add from the vetting perspective of employers and positions from the co-op lens, is that you will work with Teresa or I or with other faculties to vet your position to make sure it meets the criteria for co-op education. However, we also look to see, the capacity to support these students, meaning supervisory support. So if you are looking to gain for the very first time as an employer, 3 or more, students, we would, really have to discuss, the parameters around, your capacity and so on. So we do have those types of conversations. And, just to make sure so that people aren't realizing you're able to gain 10 students right away without the infrastructure to manage that. However, there is lots of flexibility, and it isn't a one size fits all. This is very specific to the employer, to their dynamics, and also just would like to add with COVID and the pandemic, we had 400 students in our business that were out in the middle of March doing co-op, and we pivoted quickly for them working remotely. So we have, employers, especially Nova Scotia, depends on where the employer is too. We're talking primarily Nova Scotia. However, some of our employers may have other locations in other parts of Canada. So just so you know, there is opportunities for students to work completely remote right now, or a combination, depending on your nature of your business or how you are unfolding in terms of these times, as they are constantly changing. So we are flexible. However, we work with each individual based on their employer needs, recruitment needs, and so on.
And just to add to that, students get an academic credit when they do co-op on their transcript. So we need to make sure that there's a supportive environment, that there's someone there to be able to give them support and guidance while they're doing their co-op work term. So those are the conversations we have to make sure that it's a win-win for everyone, because it has such an impact on their transcript and their graduation requirements. So it's not just hiring a summer student. These students are usually 2nd to 5th year students that are highly motivated, that you don't have to handhold in the majority of the cases. But we just need to make sure that the support and structure is there, as Cindy mentioned.
And Ken, if I can just add just one little bit more flexibility there. Our program obviously works very effectively with co-op students and all those parameters that Cindy and Teresa mentioned, but we're not limited just to co-op. So we can work with students that don't have an academic requirement to work, but are just looking for an opportunity to gain some experience in the workplace and probably make a little bit of money on the side as well. So yeah, we can work with NSCC students all the way up to university PhD grads.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think that's a pretty clear clarification. I mean, we're talking about the stacking and the ability to put all these things together, but they don't have to be that way either. There's lots of flexibility in each program, so that's great. And from an anecdotal perspective, like I said, we have 2 corporate residence MBA students here, both international students. So again, the flexibility to make this work during COVID is there as well. We also have a 3rd student who's working remotely that I still haven't met in person. So I mean, it's very doable, and these programs are proving to be that flexible. So that's wonderful. We're starting to run out of time, but there's a couple more questions, and I know you've each touched on this. And as I listen to everyone speak, it does start to sound complicated. So as a sort of a small business or someone trying to really access this, and I know you've all touched on it. Sort of how complicated is this application, just anecdotally from your perspective, how complicated is it to get through the process, and how quickly can you get through the process?
I can actually answer that one, because Tim and I have ran into these quite a bit this summer, especially with COVID. So I'll give you an example of how quickly it can turn around. If an employer has a conversation with myself or Cindy, I'll speak to myself, but it's pretty similar. I've had a conversation with an employer on a Friday about hiring students, funding available. I did an introduction to Tim. He applied for funding. He got 2 pre-approval for the summer, 1 for the fall, and 1 for the winter. All of that happened, and the job was posted within a week. So if you can connect to Cindy and I, we will make sure that they know all about the processes. It's not as complicated as it seems. That's why Cindy and I are in the roles that we are. So we work predominantly with new companies. Cindy works in Nova Scotia. I work across the country. But it's really just to make things really simplistic and easy for employers. So if you can connect to us, we can make it happen.
I will say though,
You're on mute, Cindy.
I just will say, in all honesty, in working with sole proprietors, if you're doing this all on your own, navigating this, I will say, yeah, it can be as easy as a week. But if you are stacking, that's not as easy as we're making it sound like it seems. And what I mean, I'm just being brutally honest in terms of employers. Yeah, if you're looking for one piece of funding, that's generally like a straight, step-by-step process. But when you're looking to stack, that's when sometimes you need support in terms of, okay, for the labor and advanced education, they require an endorsement from a co-op office. If you don't know that and you go to open application, they're going to tell you to go back to the co-op office. When you're doing the federal, everything's online, but to have an affiliated relationship with Tim, who does regional funding, we can fast track things. But if employers are just doing this independently on their own, they may come into, a little bit of a what's next kind of a thing. So what I'm saying is our federal partners, delivery partners, there's 10, funding partners, they had never had pre-approval. You had to have a student in place, but now they've made this more possible so that employers can then go and find the student to then, post on our portals. So, although we have had some really awesome success stories of like within 1 week, I just want to be very clear that sometimes, it does take employers a little bit longer, and appreciate the fact that we are there every step of the way to try to make it as seamless as possible, as well as our counterparts at Labor Advance. They're very helpful, as well as ICTC. But there is a bit, and I will say, once you try it once, Kent, it's like anything. It's like riding a bike. Then you're like, oh, this is how it works. Oh, that's what they need. So I just would like to be, very clear as you might be following up with us and might be shaking your head a little bit, but we will help you as much as we can. And it is not a problematic once you kind of do it once. If that makes sense, right, Teresa?
Oh, I think that's great, Cindy. And I think on that note, I'll summarize. That note is really about collaboration and speaking to these people that you're seeing on the screen right now. because they all know each other, and any one of these people can point you in the direction you need to go if you're trying to stack or access multiple programs. And you can start with one, and I'm sure they'll all put you in touch with the others. So on that note, I want to thank Tim, Margaret, Teresa, and Cindy. It's been a really great hour. I hope our members and guests have gotten something from it. These folks are available. They've posted their information for you. Please use them. This is an incredible resource for talent. And I want to wish you all a great day, because it's a beautiful one. So if you can get out and enjoy it, please do. If you have any questions, please follow up with us. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.